A house is more than walls and a roof, it's where your memories live. So when my son sold mine without even asking, it felt like he'd sold my entire life. But what he didn't know was that my late wife and I had prepared for this moment. And when the lawyer called, everything changed. The house wasn't just real estate to me. It was 35 years of laughter echoing through hallways, the smell of Sunday dinners that lingered for hours, and the spot by the fireplace where my wife used to sit with her tea. It was where my children grew up, where we weathered storms both outside and inside, and where I planned to draw my last breath. My son Daniel never understood that. To him, the house was numbers on a page, an untapped fortune just waiting to be cashed in. Dad, he'd say, looking around the living room with a kind of hunger in his eyes, do you realize what this place is worth? You could sell it, retire somewhere sunny, and never worry again. I'd always shake my head. This isn't just a house, Daniel. This is home, and some things aren't for sale. He'd laugh, shake his head, and mutter under his breath, everything has a price. At the time, I thought it was just talk. The kind of restless chatter of a son always chasing the next big thing. But I didn't know those words were a warning, a crack in the foundation of our relationship, a betrayal waiting in the shadows. Because one ordinary Tuesday morning the phone rang, and when I answered, Daniel's voice carried the blow that would shatter everything. Dad, it's done. The house is sold. When Daniel said the house was sold, my first instinct was denial. I told myself maybe he was joking, maybe I had misheard him, maybe this was just another one of his careless exaggerations. But the next day, the truth arrived on my doorstep. Strangers, sharp suits, clipboards in hand, walked through my halls as if they already owned them. They tapped the walls, opened cabinets, and measured windows. One of them even asked casually, "When will you be moving out, sir?" I stood there, humiliated, in the very house I had built my life in. That night, I demanded answers from Daniel. He didn't come in person, he sent me an email. Attached was a copy of the sales agreement, already signed. At the bottom, next to his name, was the line that stabbed deepest, power of attorney on behalf of John Carter. I felt the blood drain from my face. Years ago, after his mother's funeral, I had signed papers giving Daniel temporary power of attorney just so he could help me with paperwork, bills, and insurance claims while I grieved. I thought it was harmless. I thought it was trust. And now he had turned that trust into a weapon. Within a week, the house was swarming with movers. They boxed up my wife's teacups, wrapped our family portraits in brown paper, stacked the books I had read to my children when they were small. They moved through every room like bulldozers through a garden. I tried to protest, but Daniel only smirked when he showed up to supervise. Dad, you'll thank me. Think of all the money we'll have. Think of the new life you can live. I wanted to scream at him, but the words caught in my throat. All I could feel was humiliation, not just that he had stolen my house, but that neighbors watched from their porches, whispering pity in their eyes. I sat in my emptying living room, surrounded by boxes that smelled of dust and loss, wondering how my own flesh and blood could betray me like this. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my phone rang. It wasn't Daniel, it was my lawyer. His voice was calm, steady, almost chilling. "John, I heard about the sale. I think it's time we opened the file your wife left behind." When my lawyer, Mr. Harris, said, "It's time we opened the file your wife left behind," my chest tightened. I hadn't heard those words since the weeks after her funeral. Back then, grief blurred everything, and I told Harris to keep whatever we had signed locked away. I didn't want to face paperwork while my heart was broken, but now her foresight had become my lifeline, expression calm but purposeful. "Your wife insisted on this," he said. She knew Daniel's appetite for shortcuts. "She wanted to make sure the house could never be touched without your clear consent." My hands shook as I pulled out the papers. There it was in black ink, inheritance clause. The family home cannot be sold, transferred, or leveraged without the direct signature of John Carter. Any power of attorney is nullified by this clause. I blinked. "You mean?" Harris leaned back, his voice steady. "I mean your son sold something he didn't legally own. The sale is void. And now the buyer will go after him for fraud." It didn't take long. The furious buyer threatened Daniel with a lawsuit, claiming damages and breach of contract. His flashy lifestyle, the car, the vacations, the late-night business deals, began to unravel. Daniel called me, his voice stripped of arrogance for the first time. "Dad, you have to help me. Tell them it was all a mistake." I sat in my quiet living room, the house that still belonged to me, and let his words hang in the air. Finally, I said, "Daniel, the mistake wasn't the paperwork. The mistake was thinking you could betray your own father and get away with it." He shouted, he begged, but the damage was already done. The house stood exactly where it always had. The only thing collapsing was the empire of lies my son had built. The next week felt like watching a storm roll in. One black cloud at a time. Every day, Daniel's voice grew more frantic on the phone. First, it was frustration. "Dad, just tell them you approved it. We can fix this." Then desperation. "Please, they're threatening to sue. I'll lose everything." And finally, fear. "Dad, I think I might go to jail." I didn't answer most of his calls. When I did, my words were few. "Talk to your lawyer, Daniel," because mine had already explained it all. Mr. Harris laid the documents out on his desk like a chessboard. "Your son committed fraud," he said plainly. "He signed away property he never had the legal right to sell. The buyer is not just angry, they're preparing to take him to court." I rubbed my temples, but will they drag me into it? Harris shook his head. "No, your late wife made sure of that. This clause," he tapped the page with his pen, "shields you completely. The house is yours and the sale is void." Any lawsuit lands squarely on Daniel's shoulders. He paused, his expression softening. "Your wife was a very wise woman, John. She saw this coming. She knew Daniel's hunger for easy money could one day turn dangerous. She wanted to leave you protected." His words hit me harder than any hammer. I remembered her pale face in those last weeks, the way she squeezed my hand as she whispered, "Promise me you'll protect the house." "It's not just bricks, John. It's us." She hadn't just trusted me, she had guarded me, even from our own son. The beauty and cruelty of it was in the trap itself. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted me, turned my grief and trust into his leverage, but the moment he signed those papers, the trap closed. The deal was a ghost. The money he thought he'd touch vanished, and instead of profit, he inherited debt, lawsuits, and shame. He didn't just lose the house, he lost everything he thought he controlled. That night, I walked through the house alone. The movers were gone, the boxes were stacked neatly where they'd been dropped, and the silence felt restored. I ran my hand along the doorframe where I had marked my children's heights in pencil as they grew. Faded lines, dates scrawled in my handwriting. One for Daniel at 6 years old, smiling proudly as I wrote the number. Now, decades later, I traced that line with my fingertip and whispered, "Your mother saved us from you, son." The storm outside had only just begun for Daniel, but inside these walls, justice had already arrived. The storm hit Daniel faster than either of us expected. First came the buyer's lawsuit, a scathing demand for damages, fraud, and breach of contract. His bank accounts froze overnight. The credit cards he loved to swipe so freely were suddenly declined. Then came the whispers. Friends who used to flock around him for dinners and parties vanished. Business partners pulled out of deals. Even neighbors who once admired his flashy cars now shook their heads when he passed. I watched it unfold from the safety of the home he tried to steal. Newspapers picked up the case. Local man accused of fraudulent sale. The headline read, though they didn't use our family name directly. Everyone in town knew, everyone whispered. Daniel, who thrived on image, now walked under a cloud of shame. I saw him one afternoon, standing outside the courthouse with reporters shouting questions. His tie was crooked, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow. For the first time he looked small. He called again. That night, voice shaking, "Dad, I'm ruined. They're going to take everything." Please just tell them you gave me permission. I sat in my quiet kitchen, looking at the photo of my late wife on the wall. Her eyes seemed to hold me steady, reminding me of the promise I made to protect the house and myself. Daniel, I said, my voice firm, you didn't just sell a house. You sold your family's trust. And that's one thing no money can buy back. Silence, then a sob. My son, proud, arrogant, untouchable Daniel, weeping like a child who had finally realized the world no longer bent to his will. I should have felt pity. I should have felt the pull of a father's love to rescue him. But instead, I felt something else, Justice, because the same house he tried to rip from my hands had become the trap that swallowed him whole. The walls still stood. The memories still lived. But Daniel's empire of greed, it crumbled in front of the whole world, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Marble walls, polished floors, a judge who barely looked up from her notes. But when my name was called, the weight of years pressed onto my shoulders. This wasn't just about a house. This was about betrayal, dignity, and the truth my wife had safeguarded long before she left this world. Daniel sat across from me, looking nothing like the confident man he once was. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his hands twitching as though he wanted to claw his way out of the mess he had built. The buyer's lawyer spoke first, laying out the charges of fraud and damages. Then Daniel's lawyer tried to spin it. My client was under the impression he had full authority to sell the property. His father signed power of attorney, but Harris, my lawyer, rose smoothly and placed the sealed inheritance file on the bench. Your Honor, that power of attorney was nullified years ago. The property could not be sold without Mr. Carter's direct signature. This sale was fraudulent from the start. The judge skimmed the documents, her eyes narrowing. Then she turned to Daniel. Did you knowingly sell property without legal authority? Daniel stammered, I thought I could. I didn't. But the judge raised a hand. The documents are clear. The house remains with Mr. Carter. The sale is void. Any damages will be determined in the civil case pending against you, Mr. Carter, Jr. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Just like that, my house was restored. My name, my home, my dignity safe once more. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Across the room, Daniel collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. The son who thought he could gamble with his father's life had just gambled away his own. Outside the courthouse, neighbors and reporters whispered. Some glanced at me with respect. Others shook their heads at Daniel, the fallen son who had betrayed his own blood for greed. That night, I walked through the house in silence. The same walls, the same pictures, the same familiar creak in the staircase. It felt heavier now, as though it had absorbed every battle, every betrayal, and still stood tall. My wife's photograph hung in the hallway. I stopped, touched the frame, and whispered, You were right. You saved us. Justice had been served, not with fireworks, not with vengeance, but with truth, and the truth was enough. They say a house is just wood, brick, and stone, but standing in these rooms I know better. A house is the echo of laughter long gone, the smell of dinners shared, the mark on the wall where children once grew taller under your watchful eye. A house is a memory you can touch. Daniel tried to sell mine as if it were nothing more than currency, and in doing so, he didn't just betray me, he betrayed himself, because greed blinds and betrayal always carries a cost. I still walk the same halls, sit in the same chair by the window, tend the same roses in the garden. The house remains mine, but it's quieter now. Not just because my wife is gone, but because my son chose to step outside of it, out of love, out of family, out of trust. And yet, I've learned something. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the steady strike of a gavel, in the quiet dignity of truth outlasting lies. So when people ask me if I regret not saving Daniel from the consequences, I tell them this. He sold his soul before he ever sold this house, and justice made sure the house stayed where it belonged. Because betrayal may break hearts, but truth builds foundations that can never be sold.